Nandi was walking through the forest alone when she heard it, the sound of someone calling her name. The voice was deep, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. She froze. It was late, and she knew no one should be out here. Her heart pounded as she turned, but all she saw were the tall trees swaying under the moonlight. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, out of the darkness, a tall, handsome man stepped forward. He had deep brown skin, bright eyes that glowed like fireflies, and a smooth voice that sent shivers down her spine. "Do not be afraid," he said. "I have been watching you, Nandi. You are the most beautiful woman in the village. Will you be my wife?" Nandi had never seen him before, yet there was something enchanting about him. His voice was soothing, his smile warm. Though she was frightened, she felt drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. He promised her a life filled with riches, love, and happiness. Against her parents' warnings, she left with him that night. He led her deeper into the forest, far from her village. The trees seemed to whisper as they passed, and the wind howled like it was trying to warn her. But Nandi was too blinded by love to listen. When they arrived at his home, she was surprised. It was a grand hut, bigger than any she had ever seen. Inside, gold and fine cloth covered the floor. She was amazed. "This is my home now," she thought, smiling. Days passed, and at first, everything seemed perfect. But soon, Nandi noticed strange things. Her husband never ate food. He never slept, and every night, when the moon was high, he would disappear into the darkness and return before dawn. One evening, she followed him. She hid behind the trees and watched as he walked to an old graveyard. There, under the pale moonlight, he knelt beside a tombstone and began to whisper in a language she did not understand. Then, right before her eyes, his body began to change. His skin turned pale, his eyes hollow, his hands became bony, and his beautiful face, sank in like an old skull. Nandi gasped in horror. Her husband was not a man. He was a ghost. Fear gripped her heart. She ran back to the hut, but she knew she couldn't stay. She had to escape before he returned. Quickly, she gathered a few things and fled into the night. The wind howled around her, whispering, "Run, run." The trees groaned, as if they, too, were alive. But she didn't stop. She ran and ran until she reached the village. When she burst into her parents' home, gasping for breath, they looked at her in shock. "We warned you," her mother said, tears in her eyes. "You married a spirit of the dead." Nandi never spoke of him again. But every night, when the wind blew through the trees, she could hear his voice calling her name. Though Nandi had escaped the ghost's clutches, her nightmare was far from over. That very night, as she lay in her parents' hut, exhausted and afraid, a chilling wind swept through the room. The fire dimmed, the air grew heavy. Then, she heard it. A whisper, "Nandi, you are mine." Her blood turned to ice. She sat up, heart pounding, eyes darting around the dark room. The door was shut, the windows were closed, but the whisper came again, closer this time. "Nandi, why did you leave me?" Suddenly, the hut shook. The wooden walls creaked, and the fire died completely. Shadows stretched across the room like clawed hands. Her mother and father woke with startled cries, but before they could move, a loud thud came from outside. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, unnatural. "Nandi!" she screamed. By morning, the whole village had heard of Nandi's terrifying encounter. The elders gathered, their faces grim. One old woman, known as Mama Kalima, stepped forward. She was the village's wisest seer, known for her knowledge of spirits and curses. "This is no ordinary ghost," Mama Kalima said, shaking her head. "He is a wandering soul, trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead. He was buried without proper rites, and now he searches for a bride to keep him company in his loneliness." Nandi shivered. "How do I stop him?" she asked desperately. The old woman sighed. "We must return to his grave and complete the burial rituals. Only then will he be at peace." That night, a group of warriors, elders, and Nandi herself set out for the graveyard. The trees loomed over them, and the wind carried eerie whispers. The villagers sang protective chants, holding torches high to keep the darkness at bay. When they reached the grave, the earth trembled. A thick mist rolled in, and suddenly, he appeared. The ghost of Nandi's husband stood before them, his once handsome face now a hollow skull, his glowing eyes filled with rage. "You cannot take her from me," he roared, his voice shaking the ground. The elders quickly began the sacred ritual, sprinkling herbs and reciting ancient prayers. The warriors formed a circle around the grave, their spears raised. Nandi, her heart hammering, stepped forward. "You are not my husband," she said firmly, her voice steady. "You are a lost soul. You do not belong here." The ghost let out a terrible scream, his form flickering. The ground cracked open beneath him, pulling him toward the earth. His skeletal hand reached for Nandi one last time, but she stepped back. With one final cry, the spirit was sucked into the grave. The earth closed over him, the wind stopped, and the night fell silent. From that day on, Nandi never ventured into the forest alone. She learned to listen to the wisdom of her elders and to never trust beauty without knowing the soul beneath it. And though the village was peaceful once more, some nights, when the wind was just right, a whisper could still be heard in the trees. "Nandi."